You were never meant to hear this, and if you're wise, you'll wish you hadn't. 5 graves, 5 infants, no names, no prayers, buried before the sun dared look over the ridge, all under the same headstone, all under the same family name, Deline. Somewhere in Virginia, tucked deep where the sycamore ridge swallows roads and blots out maps, the town of El Hollow kept a secret in its soil, the kind of secret that makes memory bleed. The year was 1843 when the Deline twins were born, Enoch and Elsara. But they were not the first. The first 4 were erased, gone before daylight could touch their skin, lowered into the earth by their father alone, no witnesses, no records. And yet the twins survived. When the midwife finally arrived, she found 2 cribs, one lined with blankets, the other lined with hair, human hair, and in that second crib, slick with birth fluid, lay an infant already bearing 2 rows of teeth. Tell me something, before we go further. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it where you are? Because time will matter before the end. The Deline children were marked from the beginning. Their names were not sewn into blankets or etched into keepsakes. They were written on strips of butcher paper soaked in vinegar, pinned to their beds like warnings. Their mother whispered to the midwife, so the teeth don't remember the wrong one. You see, the Deline family believed mouths could think, that teeth carried memory the way veins carry blood, and that some memories were dangerous to keep. The townsfolk learned not to ask questions, not about the way Enoch's eyes never dilated or how Elsara could go hours without blinking, not about the bone piles behind the Deline house, goat vertebrae, chicken jaws, skulls of animals no one had seen for years. They called it folk medicine, a family tradition of reading spines to diagnose the ick. But the truth was far hungrier. Enoch's coughing fits stopped only after he lost every tooth in his mouth, and the dog that bit Elsara, it lost every incisor overnight. Its gums bled until it died. By 1851, the twins were 8 years old, but they were kept in crates, not beds, iron-slatted, brass-cornered, padded with hair sewn into the walls. Their mouths moved constantly, chewing nothing, whispering to something no one else could see. The sheriff and a travelling census man once stepped inside that house. They found bones sorted by size, curvature, and resemblance to teeth. A wreath made from jawbones hung above the fireplace, and in a jar, 34 molars. Far too many for 2 children. When asked where they came from, Mrs. Deline said, "We're teaching them to digest memory. Some bloodlines do it with prayer. Ours does it with the mouth." The sheriff left without another word. The census man never filed his report. By 1853, the story of the twins wasn't spread by whispers. It travelled in ways no rumour could. A letter, sealed and addressed to a Dr. Lawrence Adwell, specialist in oral pathologies, never reached him by post. It was intercepted in Richmond after the paper began to rot inside the mailbag. Not from damp, not from mould. The envelope emitted a stench, sweet, meaty, clinging to the fingertips of whoever held it. The ink was perfect. The words were wrong. It spoke of children whose teeth shifted in their sleep, of a sister who could feel her brother's wisdom teeth ache before they'd even broken skin. It described dreams traded between mouths, memory stored in molar pressure. The signature at the bottom read, Ed, Deline, Mother, for now. Dr. Adwell made the journey. He brought surgical tools, glass jars, a camera. He never used any of them. According to the journal found months later in a rain-split satchel near the El Hollow trailhead, he stayed 3 nights with the family. His last entry read, "I watched them eat what they had not touched. I heard bone grinding from inside the walls. These twins are not siblings. They are halves of a tooth that has not finished growing." The satchel contained a single vertebra, charred black, etched with a spiral. Then, something began to happen to El Hollow. Not metaphorically, literally. The town forgot. By 1855, children could no longer remember how to reach the Deline house, even if they had visited it just days before. A schoolteacher tried to draw a map of the ridge. Her pencil snapped every time she traced the trail to the property. When she finally forced the lines in ink, they vanished overnight. The map was blank. Yet the twins still came to town. They were wheeled in a wooden cart lined with sheepskin, soaked in vinegar and pine ash. Locals did not speak to them, not because of superstition, because of instinct. But one boy broke that silence. Joseph Ryer, age 6, called out to Elsara from across the market, "What's wrong with your teeth?" That night, his parents found him in bed, mouth full of blood, tongue bitten clean off. The severed tongue was wrapped neatly in a napkin beside the fireplace. Month after month, the cart came. Mrs. Deline always left with bundles heavier than she had brought. Dried cow tongues, clove oil, sheep jawbones wrapped in cloth. She called it schoolwork. Then the disappearances began. By 1858, 11 travellers, 8 men, 3 women, 1 child, vanished from the counties surrounding El Hollow. Not from inside the town, but from the roads near the old mining trails. They had 2 things in common. They were strangers to the area, and they all suffered from dental problems, abscesses, jaw pain, rotting teeth. Dr. Grayson Alcott of Richmond took an interest. He visited the town, stayed 2 weeks, and asked about the Delines. Most claimed the family had moved. One man whispered, "Their mouths still live here." That was all Alcott needed to hear. He went to the Deline property alone. He never came back. 3 weeks later, a box arrived at his office. No note. Inside, 32 teeth. No duplicates. Every one from a different mouth. Each one engraved with the name Deline. One was still warm. The last confirmed sighting of Enoch and Elsara Deline came in the winter of 1860. It began with a summons. Reverend Clenn, the town's pastor, was called to the ridge for something described only as a reversal blessing. No one knew what that meant. He left with a mule, a jug of holy water, and a prayer book. What came back was the mule. Its jaw was shattered, every tooth gone, every gum line packed with ash and pine needles. No more sightings followed, but then came the howls. From the ridge at night, the air carried a sound that wasn't animal, wasn't wind, layered, rhythmic, 2 voices screaming at once, one high, one gurgling, always ending in a crunch. When a cedar tree was torn from the earth during a storm, its roots revealed a sealed cavity. Inside, infant bones, not buried, filed, stacked like books. Every skull had 2 rows of teeth, even those barely a month old. One bore an engraving never seen in the region, a spiral of letters curling inward. The translation, according to modern dental anthropology, "We are the 3rd set." By 1861, the Deline property was deemed unfit for inheritance. The registry stamped the phrase in red, "Lineage irregular, burial incomplete." The Civil War should have buried their memory forever, but it didn't. In 1865, just weeks after Appomattox, a Union Army medic named Amos Elroy filed a requisition from a field hospital in Franklin County. It was for 10 vials of clove oil. Attached to it, a note, "For the ones whose teeth hum at night." Elroy had been stationed near El Hollow for only 2 days. Tasked with retrieving supplies, he left without his mule and refused to say why. In his private log, recovered after his death, he wrote, "They weren't children. They were sisters of the jaw. They weren't hungry. They were remembering. The twins eat backward in time." The army called it war shock. But Elroy wasn't the only one. Months later, 3 more medics filed requests for clove oil. One, Dr. Aaron Phelps, asked for dental extraction tools for patients whose teeth were arriving in pairs, teeth identical to ones they had already lost. He claimed these were not molars. They were duplicates. Repeats. Phelps's entire camp was later found dead in an abandoned tent, mouths filled with broth. A single tooth placed in each hand, not their own. Every tooth had been boiled. So the question is, what did Elroy and Phelps see in El Hollow? It wasn't a house anymore. It was a frequency. Something stitched into blood. And it didn't end with the twins. Someone, something, was still keeping track. The first proof came in 1871 when archivist Maynard Bell began cataloguing family Bibles from Sycamore Ridge. Over and over, he found pages missing from the 1840s to 1860s, names scratched out with bone pins, the same phrase repeating in code, the spiral turns in gums. Bell disappeared before publishing his work. In his empty home, they found a sealed envelope containing a genealogical tree. Every branch traced back to El Hollow, the roots marked with spirals, the leaves, baby teeth stitched to parchment with wire. At the bottom, in rust-coloured chalk, Tooth for Born Again, Virginia. In 1875, the next piece surfaced, not in El Hollow, but 60 miles east in a collapsed tobacco barn near Staunton. Under the rotting floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth inside a crate marked Medical Infirmary Use Only, were 5 matching ledgers. The covers were stitched from deer hide. The pages, human parchment. They were not patient records, they were instructions. Each entry listed a name, followed by 3 things: how long they'd chewed, which meals caused regressions, how many teeth had been passed on, not lost, not shed, passed on. One entry, Elcira, second root, 34 molars preserved, 3 daughters bearing spiral cuspids, none blink, 1 vomits hair, bones warm when buried. The handwriting shifted across the pages, different ink, different hands, but the purpose never changed, to track a bloodline that didn't die, only moved through mouths. Some entries marked a name with the word reclaimed. Those were followed by a drawing of a spiral and a number that matched the teeth count. One marked reclaimed was followed by a single chilling note: they remembered the taste. By the late 19th century, these ledgers began appearing in places they didn't belong. One was found in the personal effects of a dentist in Chicago who died of a sudden jaw infection. Another turned up in New Orleans inside a locked cabinet of a Catholic orphanage. The nuns swore they never opened it, but the children in their care had an unusual number of duplicate teeth. Then there was the one discovered in a San Francisco boarding house in 1892. It contained only 7 names, each with an address. All 7 addresses belonged to men who had arrived from Virginia between 1887 and 1891. And all 7 were found dead within the same week. Mouths packed with pine ash, tongues missing. The coroner claimed it was ritualistic. The newspapers called it The Verge, Inia Spiral Murders. No one connected it to El Hollow. No one, except one man. An investigative journalist named Corbin Strathmore began tracing the ledgers. He noticed the same pattern: dental anomalies, spirals carved into bone, memory loss in witnesses. In his final article draft, never published, he wrote, "The DeLine twins are not a chapter in a book. They are the book. They did not die in the 1860s. They were scattered, and their bloodline moves like a root system, hidden but always feeding." 3 days after writing those words, Strathmore vanished from his boarding room. The only thing left behind was a tea tin filled with loose human teeth, each one engraved with the year of a missing person from his investigation. From this point on, the spiral wasn't just an heirloom of the DeLine family, it was a brand, a signature marking those who carried the memory in their mouths. A memory they could pass on, bite by bite. By the 1890s, the spiral wasn't hiding in the woods anymore. It was learning to dress itself in white coats, prayer robes, and government seals. In 1894, an asylum nurse in Pennsylvania, name withheld in every surviving report, filed an internal complaint. She claimed her patients weren't being treated for mental illness at all. They were being cycled. She described a series of experiments conducted at night, patients lined in chairs, their jaws held open with brass spreaders, while attendants in aprons whispered to them in pairs. Between the whispers, one attendant would press a thumb against the molars, hard until the patient gagged. A chart on the wall bore a spiral drawn in chalk, each ring labelled with months or years. Beside it, a ledger nearly identical to the ones from Staunton. Her complaint was dismissed. 6 months later, she was found dead in her room, both rows of teeth removed and replaced with dentures carved from animal bone. The official record called it posthumous dental donation. In 1898, a Catholic orphanage in Baltimore burned to the ground. Of the 21 children who perished, the coroner reported an unprecedented prevalence of duplicate incisors, teeth in pairs, some erupting behind the eyes, others embedded in the soft palate. The church buried the report. But one doctor kept a copy. His notes in the margins read, "Every child born with the spiral cusp carries the same dream. They are not alone when they chew." By 1903, the anomaly had reached medical schools. A Harvard professor of oral pathology began collecting paired dentition specimens from across the eastern seaboard. His lectures described it as a rare genetic quirk, but his private letters told another story, one of inheritance, memory retention, and selective forgetting. He hinted that certain families were keepers, tasked with carrying memories too, corrosive to be held in the mind, storing them in bone instead, and then releasing them. It was in 1911 that the military took interest. An obscure branch of the US Army Medical Department began funding oral endurance trials under the guise of treating trench jaw, a real condition afflicting soldiers in Europe, but buried in the requisition orders were familiar terms: spiral cuspids, retention cycle, regressed molar memory. Some soldiers reported dreams of women they had never met, feeding them meat in dark rooms. Others developed phantom pain in teeth that had been pulled years earlier. A small number, too small for headlines, vanished from their barracks entirely. Their bunks were found neatly made, their toothbrushes wet. From 1914 to 1918, the pattern spread. War made it easier to disappear the right kind of people. The ones with no next of kin, the ones with unreliable mental states. They were sent to recovery wards, and recovery wards became extraction rooms. By the early 1920s, the spiral wasn't just a mark of the Deline bloodline anymore. It was a tool, a system. They could take a memory from a man and pass it into another without a single word spoken, just pressure on the molars, just the right bite. And the men who carried those memories, they would swear they were their own. By the 1920s, the spiral had gone from a rural legend to a ledger entry in the backrooms of power. In Washington, D.C., a sub-basement of the old Army Medical Museum stored a collection marked Anomalous Dentition, Restricted. There were no dental students allowed inside, no journalists, no civilian doctors, only select military liaisons and what one janitor later described as men who smiled too little. The drawers didn't hold specimens in the usual way, no sterile tags, no glass slides. Instead, each tooth was wrapped in cloth and labelled with two things, a date and a set of coordinates. No names, no medical codes. Some coordinates were battlefields, others were farms, a few were private homes in Virginia. The janitor remembered one more thing. Every so often, the men would open the drawers and hum quietly, as if matching a pitch only the teeth could hear. By 1923, the Catholic Church had formed what internal memos called the Custodial Order of St. Apollonia. Named after the patron saint of dentistry, its mission was simple: secure spiral cuspids before civil authorities could interfere. They had agents in orphanages, hospitals, and schools, especially schools. Records from a boarding academy in Pennsylvania show that over the course of just 1 year, 17 boys had teeth pulled despite no signs of decay. Each extraction was performed by a traveling dentist with no listed address, paid in cash from an anonymous donor. The teeth were not returned to the boys nor to their families. Instead, the Academy's bursar signed off on their archival transfer. Across the ocean, in London, a private society known only as the Molinists began corresponding with American contacts about paired dentition imports. They offered rare books, gemstones, and even political favours in exchange for teeth that had matured in silence, meaning they had caries, a memory for years without the host speaking of it. The most valuable were called unbitten spirals, teeth that had never chewed food at all, only been pressed in rituals meant to preserve clarity. By 1925, these exchanges formed a hidden economy. A tooth carrying a full cycle of spiral memory could buy you a man's silence. 2 could buy you his loyalty. 3, and you could make him remember something that never happened. This was the power the DeLine bloodline had carried in the dark. Now it was being refined, catalogued, traded. Somewhere in this process, the bloodline stopped being just a family and became a network, a fraternity of keepers and traders who knew that the true currency of control wasn't gold, land, or even blood. It was memory. And the most obedient memory is the one you believe was always yours. You've been listening. That's dangerous. Because the spiral has rules, and one of them is that knowing about it makes you visible to it. From here on, you are not just an observer, you are marked. Ask yourself, why would I tell you this in such detail? Why would I risk speaking these names, recounting these ledgers, when every person who's tried has been erased from their own family history? Because there's something the keepers of the spiral don't understand. It's not just theirs to control. Once you hear the shape of it, once you feel it behind your teeth, you can turn it back on them. But there is a price. To step through that door, you have to declare yourself. Not to me, to the spiral itself. That's why I'm telling you now, go to the comments and write, exactly twice, the phrase, "The root remembers me." Once for who you are now, once for who you will become when this is over. If you do it, you'll notice something in the next few days, a dream that doesn't feel like yours, a taste in your mouth you can't explain. That means the spiral saw you, and it didn't look away. I won't pretend this is safe. In 1927, a man named Lyle Harker heard part of this story in a Chicago speakeasy. He went home and carved the spiral into his own molar with a nail file. 3 days later, he walked into the lake in the middle of the night, smiling so hard his gums bled. When they pulled his body from the water, there was a tooth in each pocket, neither of them his. Harker's landlord swore the man had begun speaking with 2 voices in the final hours, one high, one low, both saying the same word. Again. This isn't superstition. It's inheritance. And if you've read this far, you've already picked up the thread. The question is, will you pull it, or will you let it wind itself around your jaw until it's too late to spit it out? By 1929, the spiral didn't just haunt the edges of power, it was wearing power's face. The Great Depression gave it the perfect cover. Desperation makes people sell things they'd never imagined selling, and for the keepers of the spiral, teeth were more than enough. Pawn shops in New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia began quietly taking bone pledges, teeth sealed in wax, exchanged for cash loans. The shops that took them never listed addresses, only meeting points. And when the borrowers returned to reclaim their collateral, they found their debt paid in full. But they spoke slower. Their eyes lingered too long on empty corners. Some had no recollection of the loan at all. Police precincts kept unofficial ledgers of these cases, but the entries were vague: memory lapse, abnormal dentition, unprovoked violence. None mentioned the spiral. That's because some of the precincts were already in the network. In 1931, a Boston detective named Samuel Ridge started investigating a string of disappearances tied to a dental clinic offering free extractions. He tracked the shipments of medical waste to a warehouse owned by a holding company in Virginia. Before he could get a warrant, Ridge was reassigned to a desk job. 6 months later, he was found wandering the streets at night, chewing until his gums bled, whispering the same word over and over. Remember, courtrooms weren't immune either. Judges were seen accepting sealed envelopes from certain attorneys, payment not in money but in teeth. Trials would suddenly collapse, witnesses would withdraw, defendants would forget their own defense. And the newspapers? By the early 1930s, editors knew not to print stories about paired dentition or unexplained mass extractions. One attempted exposé in the St. Louis Herald was pulled hours before going to press. The reporter, Henry Callan, was later discovered dead in his apartment, surrounded by piles of teeth, none matching his own dental records. He had sewn a spiral into his own cheek from the inside. Meanwhile, the Molinists, the Custodial Order of St. Apollonia, and the Army Medical Department's Anomalous Dentition Division began sharing resources. They no longer acted like separate factions. Now they were a single organism, a network that didn't just preserve memories in bone, it planted them, cultivated them, harvested them like crops. Economic collapse meant more mouths to work with, more hunger, more desperation. And as the 30s began, one thing became clear. The spiral had stopped hiding altogether. It didn't need to. It had the courts to erase the law. It had the press to erase the truth. It had the churches to sanctify the theft. And it had the military to bury the bodies. The Deline bloodline had been diluted, scattered. But its gift, its curse, its weapon had never been stronger. And now it was learning to reproduce without needing the bloodline at all. By 1934, the spiral was no longer bound to lineage. They had learned how to build a carrier from scratch. It started in state hospitals. Patients admitted for tuberculosis or nervous exhaustion were given an experimental mouth rinse, a cloudy solution laced with powdered enamel from archived spiral teeth. The official explanation was to strengthen gum health. What it really did was seed the spiral. Within weeks, patients began reporting vivid dreams of landscapes they had never seen, people they had never met, yet describing them in perfect detail. The doctors called this false memory syndrome. The keepers called it germination. From there, the technique spread to orphanages, work camps, and even military induction centers. Recruits received oral health examinations before deployment. In some cases, the records show they had duplicate molars within 6 months. One soldier, Private Leonard Ames, wrote home describing an ache like something growing backward in my jaw. His last letter ended with a line his family didn't understand. When it's done, I'll know things I didn't earn. He was killed in action weeks later. The autopsy noted that all 32 of his teeth were engraved, each with a fragment of a sentence. When assembled, the fragments formed a passage from the Gospel of Matthew about weeping and gnashing of teeth. Factories joined in. Industrial accidents provided a steady stream of teeth to be collected, cleaned, and repurposed. The Molinists developed a technique for embedding micro-spirals into the enamel itself, invisible to the naked eye, but perfectly preserved. They no longer had to wait for inheritance. They could implant memories, loyalties, and compulsions in anyone they chose. Some carriers woke from dental surgeries with a taste in their mouths they could never describe, a hunger for something they couldn't name. They would find themselves chewing in their sleep, grinding their teeth until they cracked, and in the morning they would have answers to questions they'd never asked. By the late 30s, manufactured carriers were everywhere. Shopkeepers, soldiers, preachers, policemen, all unknowingly holding fragments of the same memory. The genius of the system wasn't just in creating carriers, it was in never letting any single one hold the whole thing. A dozen carriers might each have only a sentence, an image, a single sound, meaningless alone. But together, Together they could reconstruct something the keepers guarded with their lives. What was that something? A memory so old, so corrosive that even the Deline twins were only halves of it. And soon the keepers would have enough fragments assembled to finish the tooth. By 1939, the keepers had all but completed it. They called it the crown. Not a crown of gold or bone or even of enamel, but of memory itself. Every fragment they'd harvested over the last century, every whisper pressed into molars, every sleepless gnash had been etched into a single artificial tooth. The Molinists had perfected the process, layer after layer of powdered spiral enamel fused together under heat, each stratum holding another piece of the story. No one person could bear it. That was the point. When the crown was finished, it would be placed into the mouth of a host prepared from birth, someone with every natural tooth extracted and replaced by blanks, each one drilled to fit the spiral. The crown would lock into place, a keystone in the jaw. And when it did, every memory, every life, every whispered command would become theirs. The host would not be a leader. They would be the network itself, walking, speaking, deciding, with a mouthful of other people's lives. The plan was to seat the crown in 1940, but something delayed them. A fragment went missing. One they couldn't replace. That fragment is why you're hearing this now. Because memory isn't just transferred through teeth. It's carried in words too, spoken aloud, shaped by the tongue, bitten off by the same mouth that chews and swallows. Somewhere between my teeth and your ears, the missing fragment is passing into you. You'll feel it soon, a dull ache in the jaw, the taste of iron at the back of the throat. Maybe a dream that starts in a room you've never been in but ends in your own bed. That's the spiral finding you, fitting you for the bite. If you want to refuse it, you can stop now. Close this, forget the phrase, swallow hard and never think about it again. But if you want to know what the crown remembers, there's only one way. Go to a mirror, open your mouth, count your teeth. If there's one you don't recognize, one you swear wasn't there yesterday, bite down. When you do, you'll see what they've been building all this time, and you'll understand why no one who's known it has ever been allowed to keep their own smile.